In this upcoming video, you're going to notice a piece of lace hanging around a microphone. Don't let it distract you. My friend and co-host Chris Pinkerton of Nerd Rage Radio left this here after a Halloween party where he wore this little number. What was it, you ask? I'll let him divulge that information. But he hid it in my house. I have since found it, and I've tied it to his microphone, patiently waiting for him to arrive. Don't let it distract you. It's just part of the games we play around here. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Sit Down Saturday. Today, we're not going to waste too much time with any house cleaning or anything like that. Instead, what we're going to get to is an interview. What interview, you ask? Well, you should know probably from the thumbnail and from it doesn't matter. But I would still want to reveal it, okay? A couple weeks ago, I did a coverage of TFCon, and I talked about half the battle toys, H.T.B toys. Now, we've spoken about them a bit on this channel, and I've had a few questions, and they've got in touch with me. So in that little Sit Down Saturday video, I've cast my line, and I caught myself a fish. H.T.B Toys contacted me, said they'd be willing to come on and have an interview, so I recorded the interview and I got it up for you. Now, the reason why we're not going to take too much time on introductions is because the interview is about 13 minutes. And I watch my analytics. I know you guys be skipping around with the clowns from out of town. So rather than make you skip around, we're just going to get right into the interview and have a little bit of close-up final thoughts and give you some information in addition to that. But for now, let's jump right into it. Half the Battle Toys interview on their upcoming Legends line, which is the tape stuff, and their Masterpiece line, which is the crossover stuff. Let's go. So, what's up, everybody? I am sitting down with two people whose names are going to be easily confused, but hopefully it won't be confusing to you. But they are the gentlemen behind H.T.B Toys I spoke about recently in Sit Down Saturday and said I'd love to talk to those guys, and they got in touch with me, and we're talking. I have Mike.
Hey.
And I have Mick.
What's up?
Mike, what is your responsibility with H.T.B and what is your history?
I started with an upgrade kit for the Jinbo oversized Devastator that came out, but my plan all along was to eventually bring in crossover type Transformer characters. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily G.I. Joe, but it's starting with G.I. Joe and then moving on from there. And in the process of, being an avid collector and, putting together certain things, I connected with Mick in regards to some of the cassette tapes that he had done for the Legends style Soundwave that he was selling on Shapeways, and we just kind of hit it off and started working on those. And so that's kind of become the forefront of and the startup of this company.
Okay, so you guys, your partnership is relatively new then, I take it. Or
yeah.
Okay, so that makes sense. Mick, tell us a little bit about your history, what you do, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I was a fan, and I grew up on G1 and was a collector and kind of got out of the game and then got back into it with Transformers Prime, and then the Legend stuff came out. The first thing I saw was DX9's Devastator, and that just kind of blew me away, and it kind of reinvigorated my passion as a collector and my interest in the franchise and then the hobby really as a whole. And from there, they came out with that. I thought it was an awesome Soundwave. It really represented him from the cartoon to me, and that's kind of where I aim for my collection. I like detailed vehicles, and I like good representations of the characters from the source material, either the cartoon or the comic, whatever. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they came out with that Soundwave and just left them be, left us hanging with no frenzy and rumble. It's like, dude, come on. I kind of just started dabbling with 3D design there, and their Ravage cassette was really cool, and I was really inspired by how much they were able to get out of such a small package. And I kind of deconstructed that and broke down the geometry of that and kind of just started dabbling with recreating those shapes using 3D design software, and it just grew from there, and I developed from there and learned different things. There's so many great tutorials and resources out there on the internet for free.
So you're self-taught in that regard?
Yeah.
I'm kind of half self-taught. I actually went to school for computer digital 3D animation and moved on to doing other design type organizations and fell back into it.
Both of you design, and Mike, you're more into to the business side of it. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, I'm a little bit of everything, but unfortunately, I'm a single entity, and trying to do something is definitely not a one-man operation. So I've been enlisting help with other designers.
What challenges are you facing being a person of the West and trying to get this made? Maybe some of your peers aren't facing in the same regard.
Challenge number one is I'm competing with Chinese counterparts and Japanese manufacturing, things like that. Obviously, we know you can't match the level of quality and the price that you get from manufacturing in China. But I am in America, and I'm trying to keep everything in-house in America by establishing contacts with U.S. manufacturing. It's a big hurdle right now that I'm trying to get through. There are a few manufacturing companies in the United States that are on par, that can do what they need to do, but the cost obviously is quite a bit more. So it's a startup to getting things going, because if I can't get it manufactured here and I have to go to China, then there's a lot of loopholes that I have to run through for, different IPs, different things like that, that is going to be really tough to get it here done in America.
Well, I would imagine that the IPs can get tricky in America, perhaps even more so.
Yes, they can. So it's still a big process of what we're trying to figure out. Obviously this is a third-party product. I'm basically just developing a crossover transformation of vehicles in a sense, and hopefully I can still get away with doing that, here in America.
I would imagine that any of these companies that are existing in the East have less of a chance of bumping into any sort of corporate entity that would have IP ownership. Is that something that you have dealt with yet? And are you concerned about that at all?
I am concerned about it. One of the things is, third-party companies, one of the big things and why it got started and how they were able to get away with it, this is a niche market and high-end collectors. The small run production that's being established through all of these third-party companies, it's a low enough number that, they're not going to worry about it.
You mentioned numbers, and the numbers are something that have been fascinating and perhaps have led me to some sort of obsessive compulsive disorder as well. But what are you planning in regard to first run numbers?
We're probably looking at 1,000 to start. I'm in the process of talking to third-party distributors right now, and once we get pre-orders put together, at that point, we'll be able to get better numbers of what we're looking like we can produce.
That seems to be the magic number. Let me ask Mick something. In the design process of these tapes that you were doing on a Shapeways, what challenges did you face both in the scale? Which ones seemed to become the easiest, and which ones were most difficult for you to be successful in kind of designing?
That's a great question. The biggest challenge I faced with developing stuff through Shapeways was the delay in getting your product from Shapeways. Initially, when I first started printing products off of there, it was taking probably upwards of 3 to almost 4 weeks to get something in my hands once I put it up and paid to have it printed and shipped to me. That was the biggest challenge I faced. As far as the individual characters, those are really difficult because you're working with a confined space. When they're in their tape mode, they're smaller than a US quarter. The earlier ones, I was able to get like cassette tape details into parts of them so that, they kind of look like tapes if you blur your eyes just right. Like I might print off some prototypes of like early joints for the yellow lion that we're working on for the red tape player guy. I need you to try this design out, see if it actually works and functions in the real world and not just on the screen here. Because if that doesn't work, then I got to come up with something else. So, that's a real hurdle too, is working in a small space. I'm helping Mike with the initial design work on some of the larger figures we're doing at the masterpiece scale. So as an artist, I'm always anxious to work with different mediums. And, with this medium, working at a different scale is like working with different materials and different palettes. It's really exciting to me.
I'm sure you've started fishing a bit in order to line up distributors that would be willing to carry your products. Would I be right in assuming that?
Yeah.
Well, have you received any or had any pushback as a result of the IP territory?
Not at this moment, because most of the companies that I'm dealing with are mostly third party
Right. Know your audience kind of a thing.
anyway. Even some of them that I'm talking to are directly in China. Yeah, I think because they're buying a product from a company, they can't get flack from larger companies because they're just a distributor. They're essentially like a fourth party company. They're going to be buying from somebody who is getting them directly from the factory. So there's like at least 4 or 5 hands involved before it gets to a third party distributor.
Why the choice to go with the crossover direction?
For one, it really hasn't been done. And I also want to stick to characters that coincide with the particular vehicles, at least
Right.
for G.I. Joe to start with.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting take, and I think that those two franchises, you kind of always think of them paired up, maybe as a result of the comics or as a result of Hasbro buying commercial time between the two. Alternatively, they always seem to go hand in hand. But yeah, so all right, so talk to me a little bit about the kind of technical aspects of it. What scale are we talking about with this?
Yeah, so what we're looking at doing is it's a micro-sized Joe based around Masterpiece. So we already have Masterpiece human characters. All the Joe figures are all going to be roughly about that size.
Mm-hmm.
And the vehicles have to fit what they would be in vehicle form as opposed to what they should be in robot form. I was really drawn to the whole Human Alliance line that came out and how they were able to make scalable figure that works both alt mode and robot mode and makes more sense. Like for the movies, they were bigger figures because they were bigger vehicles, but it still boils down to, can an action figure drive the vehicle?
Correct.
Exactly. So these figures are going to be roughly 1.5 inches to 1.75 inches tall, fully posable, and each Transformer figure will come with 2 characters. Will come with the driver of the vehicle and then 1 main character.
Clever. I'm going to ask you some rapid fire as we close out this interview. On a scale from 1 to 10, with your priority in making the Masterpiece scale crossover stuff, where do you place the following? Sculpt.
Number 1.
So you would place that at a 10 out of 10.
Yeah, high priority.
Paint.
Paint's going to be also high priority.
Articulation.
All of these are high priority.
That's beautiful things to hear. What about hardware, stuff like ratchets and all of those sorts of things?
That is probably about a 7 to 8, only because it's going to be worked out as the figures get designed and where the transformations need to go. But I will at least have ratchets in the main construction of, knee joints, hip joints, things like that. I'd like to keep most of that ratcheted.
And then the last one I wanted to ask about was about the kind of intuitive engineering element, transformation-wise.
That's also a high priority.
I was going to say, as collectors, I almost feel like there's industry standards, on all those elements you were asking about. As collectors, we know there's an expectation out there for a certain level of all those things in order for a product to be well received and, successful in that marketplace.
I think in correlation to the price point. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
I think when you start fetching the higher price point, like I'm with it. I'm with paying the higher dollar for the more bells and whistles. It's when you start paying the higher dollar and don't get the bells and whistles that it starts to feel unfulfilling on the consumer end, from my perspective. Do you have a release date for your first Legends release or your MP release? And when I say release date, I mean, goal.
I want to say our goal to release the first run of 3 cassettes would be mid next year, mid 2020.
And what about the larger?
It's going to be the same.
Nice. I would expect it later.
Well, as far as timeline goes, this is a startup. We don't have the capital that a lot of these third-party companies have when they're going into it. So we're just taking it a little bit at a time. So we'll push out a couple of these cassettes and see how they do and see if we can make a little bit of a profit off of that and then push forward. To be honest, I'm trying to follow suit with what Fans Toys does, and they take their time.
For the larger scale, this first one that you're jumping off on, what is your target price point area?
I'm going to try to keep it around $100. I mean, the size it's going to be is going to be relative to most of the Carbots.
Uh-huh.
I want to try to keep the price point the same.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's a good price point. Look, I wish you guys the best of luck. I appreciate you both for coming on. I hope that after you get one release out, you would be willing to come back and talk about the process of actually getting it out.
Sure.
Other than that, I'll be in the same spot watching everything unfold.
Hey, thanks again.
So that was that. Once again, I want to thank them for coming on. Our interview was like 40 minutes, I think, something like that, 40 to 50 minutes, and then I was able to cut it down to kind of the nuts and bolts for the Sit Down Saturday. The Uncut will be up on the Patreon. If you're interested, it does go to some other places, and there's some interesting talk and some history regarding these gentlemen that I wasn't aware of, certainly when I got on the line with them. So if you're interested, that's where that is. But yeah, dude, I would love to do that more often. You know what I mean? Maybe I'll start reaching out to some of these companies that aren't around anymore. See if they're... I'm going to start looking. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.